Okay, Michelle, so we start. So dear colleagues and friends of the Macau Rich Institute, I am very honored and pleased to welcome you for today's forum with Dr. Michelle Anderson on the topic of rendering spiritual friendship in crisis times, focused on Giuseppe Castiglione and the Qianlong Emperor. This forum is in the series of our forums in the Ignatian year, when we reflect on the deep conversion of Saint Ignatius Loyola and his friend Francis Xavier some 500 years ago. So we wanted to tonight also see Giuseppe Castiglione in the troubled times of the Rites Controversy and see how a Jesuit brother could become a friend of the emperor. Let me also illustrate this very nice topic. Dr. Michelle Anderson, a spiritual counselor and specialist on Ignatian spirituality, was exploring since many years already. It's also another Jesuit brother, a Swiss brother, Franz Stadlin, was master of the clocks between 1707 to 1740. And also he could not master Chinese. He was too old to pick up Chinese. He forgot his mother language, German, so he spoke a mixture of all kinds of languages, Portuguese, German, and a bit of Chinese. So nobody could understand him, but the Emperor Kangxi for hours was watching when he was repairing clocks. And so this also led to a kind of unique friendship between this humble Jesuit brother and the emperor. So without further ado, I want to give over to Dr. Michelle Anderson. Thank you very much for sharing again your insights with us, focused on this spiritual friendship in times of crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. Let's begin by setting the story of Giuseppe Castiglione in context. It was crisis times in China. Castiglione arrived in the maelstrom of the Rites Controversy on the heels of the papal legate Maria de Medici. Tournon came to China to put an end to the practice of ritual worship of ancestors. He was exiled and he was imprisoned, and foreign missionaries were banned from the country when Castiglione arrived. Foreigners and their ideas were not welcome. At the age of 19 in 1707, when Castiglione became a coadjutor brother of the Jesuits, it was already decided that he would come to China. He began to prepare training in Genoa for about 2 years before moving to Portugal and then coming eastward. And the Kangxi emperor was very eager to have him. He personally requested a skilled painter, and he wanted someone especially in portraiture, along with a musician, a good surgeon, and a few other artisans to work in the imperial court. During Castiglione's studies, he painted this uncanny harbinger of the years to come. This is the journey of Tobias going eastward, like Castiglione himself, with the angel Raphael and a faithful dog for company. And if you know the story of Tobias and eventually Sarah, Tobias is the only man to survive with the help of the angel Raphael in the intimacy of Sarah's bedroom. Little did Castiglione know that he too would find himself in the bedrooms of the emperor's women, where misguided suitors ended up dead. No men were admitted to the palace unless they were eunuchs, or they didn't leave the palace alive. And that could be quite the source of a long meditation for a young Jesuit. In China, Castiglione begins not only as a painter, but also as a teacher, relying on the sound foundation of his Ignatian pedagogy and the tradition of cura personalis. He knows how to listen deeply and carefully to the desires and interior movements of the emperor's heart. And he knows the perfect distance to keep for the right perspective on the emperor's women. Castiglione becomes a spiritual friend to the emperor, sharing his stories and also sharing his desires for distant lands as far as the eye can see and the brush can paint. He knows the emperor's passion for hunting and for the company of exotic and beautiful women. This spiritual friendship was no easy feat in the midst of the crisis relations between China and the Vatican. In 1747, the Emperor Qianlong commissions Castiglione to create the crowning jewel of his personal retreat, the Yuanmingyuan, on the outskirts of Beijing. This is also a place to welcome select dignitaries in the midst of these troubled times. And it is just over 100 years after that this place of magnificent creation would be leveled by French and British forces in the Second Opium War in 1861. Though it was referred to as a palace, it was by no means a singular palace or garden, but rather a garden of gardens, or the garden of gardens. It was here that the emperor and his concubine would bring forth the emperor's own flesh, his creation. He was, after all, the Son of Heaven, as was his father and his father's father before him. And creation was his dominion. It's by no coincidence that much of the gardens were carefully designed to look like the Yangtze River Valley, the birthplace of China's greatest literati. Castiglione had traveled extensively with Qianlong and had been on lavish hunting excursions as well, vividly captured in his paintings. Here we see a hunt which Castiglione signed, respectfully submitted by your servant, Lang Xining. This is the Chinese name that was given to Castiglione by the emperor. His name meant peace to the world. And here we see the two painter's seals and the Qianlong emperor's comment, 3 poems about the Imperial hunting games written in the late spring of 1755. The waters, like those flowing in Rome and Paris, would demonstrate dominion spreading far beyond the horizon to places that were almost beyond imagination, which would become real, recreated in the emperor's private paradise. Here, the Son of Heaven might also give life to his own word, as well as his own offspring. Here the emperor would write decrees and commandments, and above all, his own poetry, some 40,000 poems in all. 9 Western palaces, named for their European style, grew out of the collective memory of Castiglione and his Jesuit brothers from their years of studies in Europe. These men trained not only in theology, but in painting and mathematics and hydraulics. They recall details from the most spectacular palaces of Italy and France, from the cultural heritage in the spirit of St. Ignatius of Loyola. Baroque flora and fauna mingling with bamboo and limestone under Castiglione's design brought to life European luxury in the midst of the imperial Chinese court. The design project gave Castiglione free rein to reveal the glory of God in the heart of China. As the Jesuits would have it, this was all for the greater glory of God. But which God? Which Lord? The emperor, of course, beckoned. But was Castiglione, let alone any of the other Jesuits, to raise the delicate question to the emperor that he might not be God? To say this would risk the very privileged position of the handful of foreign missionaries who were still in China in the mid-18th century. In designing the Yuanmingyuan, the emperor gave Castiglione no limits. Their spiritual friendship had become such a oneness of creativity that his work was a precise response to the emperor's every desire. Castiglione could see the world so well through the emperor's eyes that his creation, the emperor's creation, and God's creation flowed like the very fountains and rivers that he designed. Castiglione called upon his French brother, Michael Benoist, to design the vast fountains at the Yuanmingyuan. In fact, the Jesuits who had all studied in Rome were quite familiar with such magnificent fountains because at the same time in Rome, there was also a massive beautification project going on. So the flow of the gardens and the fountains at the Yuanmingyuan reflected a great meeting of the waters, streaming from various parts of Europe, parallel with the scale of building going on in Rome and Paris. The Yuanmingyuan grew into a heavenly court where the Son of Heaven and his concubine would have a vision, but only that, a fleeting vision of paradise. Only a few years before their work at the Yuanmingyuan, in 1752, Castiglione and his brethren had designed a magnificent miniature fountain clock, a kind of miniature theater for the mother of the Qianlong emperor. In that clock, her imagination could revel with threads of glass pouring into a mirror pool and the beak of a duck pointing to the time, with 3 small scenes painted by Castiglione himself. This miniature would provide the imaginative incentive for one of the most impressive fountains in the Yuanmingyuan, the delights of harmony. There, according to renderings, water from the mouths of sculpted dolphins and lions cascaded among marble balustrades, with 54 sprinklers surrounding the water clock. And it was here that the 12 bronze animal heads, which were looted during the sacking in 1861, once spouted every second hour, one after another, growing out of human forms. These animal heads, a dog, a bear, a rooster, a monkey, a snake, a horse, rat, bull, tiger, dragon, a hare, and a goat, all symbolize the birth calendar and the divisions of day and night. It was as if the emperor himself now had dominion over these creatures as well as time. The best vista over this theatrical fountain was from the Sea Calming Hall. Victoria Sue writes about the Sea Calming Hall, modeled by the Jesuit architects on Versailles' Court of Honor. She describes the massive reservoir with playful goldfish under a glass ceiling, surrounded by Mediterranean grapevines. The Jesuits had established glass production originally for their astronomical equipment and for their clocks, beginning around 1712. And they produced colorful glass pebbles and shells to decorate the pavilion and the gardens. Water under a glass ceiling could pump into the surrounding fountains and mingle with lake tie stones. And these ruins can still be seen today, giving the impression of water and stones of the east and west mingling in the lavish pools, at least for a brief moment, until this blissful world went wildly wrong. I'm reminded here of Hieronymus Bosch and the Garden of Earthly Delights, which Castiglione and his artistic studies must surely have come in contact with. Castiglione brings to life this garden. What must Castiglione have thought of his creation for the emperor? As in his paintings of the auspicious signs and his peacock spreading its tail feathers, it's almost as if this grand garden are the embodiment of carpe diem. The emperor enjoyed his garden immensely, and he writes of in many poems rich in imagination, with a deep integration of his aesthetic sensitivities. a few petals of the falling flowers awoke me from a noontime snooze. The sound of fishermen I hear. Relaxed I feel. Sitting under a pine tree, I enjoy the music of birds from the bamboo forest. Alas, the gentle east wind, which reads my mind, bows green grass into gentle waves. Of the 9 Western palaces, the square outlook for looking abroad, which later became known as the Belvedere, has the most intriguing history. It was completed in time to celebrate the 50th birthday of the emperor himself, but the structure was most likely designed for his beloved concubine, Xiang Fei or Riong Fei. Wild tales and historical record mingle around this woman. She was known as the Fragrant Concubine for her irresistible scent, which she preserved by bathing daily in goat milk. A Uyghur woman from Kashgar, she was brought to the palace by a military general after winning the campaign over Turkestan in 1760. The identity of this Muslim woman has continued to swirl throughout history to this day. Her name frequently alternates between Xiang Fei and Riong Fei. Under the guided brushstroke of Castiglione, she and other palace women are depicted with an ethereal beauty that is almost like that of the Blessed Mother, or even Maria Magdalena. Beyond the brushstrokes, there we see the Fragrant Concubine. And beyond the brushstrokes, the role of scent is also significant in the oils of biblical women, and also in the ampulla imagery of the palace women, and the story of the scent of the Fragrant Concubine, Xiang Fei herself. In fact, even the biblical mystery of the 3 Marias is similar to the interchangeable names between Xiang Fei and Riong Fei. There's a story that Xiang Fei was admired by the emperor while she was bathing and washing her hair in the lake where the emperor had come to water his horse. But this tale created outrage among Uyghur Muslims, who were, of course, committed to preserving the pure image of the Fragrant Concubine. The identity parallels to Maria Magdalena are very strong. The square outlook, the Belvedere, became Xiang Fei's home and her personal place of prayer. It was a grand 3-storied structure with graceful Islamic touches, and its crescent shape was formed by 2 semicircular staircases going to the 2nd floor. And those staircases embraced 2 tablets inscribed with Arabic in the main hall. Only the rubbings of these tablets remain today. And it was here in the Belvedere that this most favored mysterious woman and other Muslim women gathered for prayer on Friday evenings. Here we see the remains of the square outlook, the Belvedere, in the 1800s. The shape of the bronze doors were reminiscent of the Church of San Andrea de Quirinale in Rome, where the Jesuits had their novitiate from 1566 onwards. That church was rebuilt by Bernini and completed in 1678. And it was considered to be one of the finest Baroque designs in Rome. It was situated on the location where the gardens and the famous Quattro Fontane remain today. Those 4 fountains represented the mingling of the rivers of Rome between Diana, the goddess of chastity, and Juno, the god of strength. So the form of the Belvedere is a very fitting inspiration to parallel the persona of the emperor in Juno and his fragrant concubine in Diana. Bronze plates of the Belvedere with this woman believed to be the fragrant concubine attest to these similarities. At the same time, the marble balustrades and the moat of the Belvedere would also have been reminiscent of the gardens and reflecting pools that were created for Maria de Medici in the Luxembourg gardens in Paris. A sensitive aesthetic, surely Castiglione would have been aware of the inspiration behind the Luxembourg gardens, which was designed to appease the longing of Maria de Medici for her beloved Boboli gardens at the Pitti Palace in Florence. The stories of Xiang Fei and Maria de Medici are very similar. Xiang Fei also desperately longed for her home in Kashgar. And Maria de Medici was married off to the King of France for political reasons and longed to the end of her life to return to Florence. The waters and the reflecting pools would bring her back to the home of her heart in much the same way that the Qianlong emperor had hoped that the gardens at the Belvedere would quell the longing of his most favored concubine, Xiang Fei. And to this end, no extravagance could be too great. Further to the east of the Belvedere stood this awe-inspiring great fountain, Da Shui Fa. The fountain in the main pool was skirted by 1 deer and 10 bronze greyhounds, spewing streams of water, and they created the impression of an exotic hunt. The design of these great fountains came from the Jesuits' own etchings of the Buffet à Faux at Versailles and the Château de Saint-Cloud, just west of Paris. The emperor was so proud of these grand fountains that he commissioned 2 copper plates engraved of the fountains and presented them to the court. Now that we've talked about the buildings and the gardens, let's get a closer look at the way Castiglione captured life within those garden walls. Remember that Castiglione was no ordinary clergyman. In contrast to the strict observances of the rules of the day, he was the first European who was invited to enter the private quarters of the emperor and his wife. To be able to paint with such intimacy and closeness shows the tremendous trust and the great respect that he also held for those women. Likewise, the Jesuits were among the first and few privileged to enter the grounds of the Yuanmingyuan. In a letter from 1743, cited by Francisco Vocilla, one of the Jesuits writes, "This charming palace is scarce even to anybody but himself, the emperor, his women and his eunuchs. The prince and the other chief men of the country are rarely admitted to any further than the audience chambers. Of all the Europeans that are here, none ever entered the enclosure, except the clockmakers and painters. The place usually assigned to us to paint in is one of those little palaces mentioned above, where the emperor comes to see us work almost every day, so that we can never be absent. There are 12 magnificent images of the ladies of the imperial court, created by the school of Castiglione, by the artists under his tutelage, for the father of the Qianlong emperor. They survived the sacking of the Yuanmingyuan, and they really show the aesthetic sensitivity of the era. In fact, in one of these images, a woman sits with an astrolabe in her curio cabinet, and in another, a woman sits with a clock. Maybe these are the gifts of one of the Jesuits, as they were the court astronomers and the clock keepers, and they were the bearers of beautiful gifts. All of the women are found in some form of contemplation, preparation, awaiting the arrival of their lord, the emperor. One contemplates nature, the signs of the times, the birds of spring. The next holds a bronze mirror, like the Pauline reference to love and knowing the Lord in Corinthians. The first mirrors in China were in fact brought as gifts by Matteo Ricci 100 years before Castiglione. A scroll behind the woman with the mirror reads, "Defeating the dust of the world." That's an aphorism that was adopted by the Yongzheng Emperor in his youth under the tutelage of the Jesuits. And it has a double meaning from the Chinese, to be pure of heart and also with few desires. A few of the women come directly from their baths. One bathing beauty contains the symbolism of a poem that was written by the Qianlong Emperor. She has the life force present in the blossoming plum tree in winter and the blessings that it conveys in the Chinese tradition. Several also have very vivid Marian symbolism, particularly this lady engaged in her needlework with her candle burning, the needlework showing her diligence and her devotion, and the burning lantern showing that she's prepared for the arrival of her Lord. A red bat fluttering in the background symbolizes blessings. And the lotus in the front symbolizes the strong seed of the emperor pressing into life through the muddy waters of chaos. In another Marian-like image, the lady holds a book half open. And in the background, there's a famous 11th century poem about the state of waiting. The calligraphed book in her hand contains a moral tale about shame. In the series, the most stunning of the images is this beauty carrying the Ruyi scepter. The Ruyi is a talisman of power. It's given to the speaker, a person who holds the word. Ruyi itself means as you wish, or as you will, or your will be done. In this image, the scepter has come to life. It's ripe. It's topped with a lingxi or Ganoderma fungi, which grows in auspicious times or the time of a very well-placed ruler. It's as if to say, she is the chosen one. She is the woman who carries the word. The woman who gave herself to the will of the emperor, to the Son of Heaven, is now with child, with word. In fact, the area in the palace where Giuseppe Castiglione worked was called the Yuanmingyuan, the Ruyi Hall. Francesco Vocilla also writes about this in his extensive work on Castiglione. A hall called Ruyi is so perfect for Castiglione. While working according to the will of the emperor, Castiglione was also creating his own annunciation, his act of artistic salvation in China, not by inspiring fear of damnation, but through beauty, through art, for the greater glory of God. This makes the savage destruction of the Yuanmingyuan only a few years after its completion all the more bedeviled. To summarize, out of the most troubled time in China, Giuseppe Castiglione is able to build a deep bond of spiritual friendship and trust. He and his Jesuit companions design a new creation, bridging East and West, mirroring experiences of longing, loss, joy, and hope. Castiglione creates a vision of the glory of God, a vision which is crushed by war, but never dies. And that is where our work carries on. Thank you.